Hi, this is the Friendly DM, back with another AD&D Toolkit tutorial video. Today we're going to be talking about more generalized AD&D material, not specifically the Toolkit web app. We're going to be doing another class video here, and today we're going to be focusing on fighters and its subclasses. So fighters, paladins, and rangers. So to start out, fighter is a great class for anybody beginning in to learn how to play advanced Dungeons and Dragons. We're going to concentrate primarily on this video, as in the other class videos, on first edition. That's where the vast predominance of my knowledge is. Fighters are just a great all-around class. They have the best hit points, the best armor, weapons, good saving throws, so they're just tough. They're harder to kill, arguably the hardest class to kill, except maybe the cleric. They are resilient. So for somebody new to the game who might make some quote-unquote mistakes early on, fighters are a great class to be playing. Pretty much, I would say every party really needs at least a couple of them within their ranks, if not more. They're the tanks, they're the meat shields. They can deal out a lot of damage. You need to have some fighters around. So you really can't go wrong playing a fighter. And I gotta say, they're a lot of fun. They might not be as sexy as some of the other, like, particularly spell casting classes. So like a druid or a magic user. But they're always in the action. They're the frontline, quote unquote, or literally fighters. They're, always going to be active. They're not going to have to, that's part of the problem of playing a magic user class, for instance, especially early on, is that they can do a lot of role play, and they can have some one-hit nukes early on, like the sleep spell, but often they're just hiding in the background somewhere, where the fighters are constantly in the action when it comes to combat. They have a lot of gear. They usually have the highest, or at least pretty high strength, so they get to carry a lot of loot. Just all around great class. Don't let anybody tell you, or don't kid yourself into thinking they're boring. They're not. A lot of magic items they can use. They can hire henchmen and so forth. They attract followers at higher levels, lots of followers, and can build strongholds, so they can develop the end game even more so than most other classes. Great class to play. So like I said, we're going to start off with the generic fighter, which is, I guess, the class major. Rangers and Paladins are the two subclasses in first edition of the fighter. That does change in Unearthed Arcana and 2e, particularly like the Paladin falls under the Cavalier class. Once you hit Unearthed Arcana, it's no longer a fighter subclass. But again, we're going to stick mostly with core first edition here today. I'll touch on Unearthed Arcana and 2e a little bit, but not too much. So the first thing I want to start with is you need to not necessarily pick your race first, but you want to be mindful of race limitations if you decide you're going to play a fighter. So we're going to start here on this racial page. This table is where I want to look, but actually before I get into that, let's just look at this quickly. These are bonuses based upon race of non-human races. So dwarf, elf, half-orc, and halflings. Half-elves and gnomes don't get any adjustments in first edition. In second edition, actually I think it's Unearthed Arcana, gnomes do. And second edition, there is no half-orc, but again, this is first edition here. So dwarves get a bonus in Constitution, a negative in Charisma, penalty in Charisma. Charisma doesn't matter much for a fighter until really later end game, when you want to start hiring lots of henchmen and attracting followers. But Constitution, Strength and Constitution are really the two primary abilities for the fighter. Can't go wrong with Dexterity either. I happen to really like Dexterity probably even better than Constitution, but traditional fighters, Strength and Constitution is what you're looking for. So dwarves make great fighters. They get that extra point of Constitution. Not only do they get an adjustment up here, but on a later table, this table here, you're going to see, I'll get to this momentarily, but dwarves, they can actually excel up to 19 constitution, beyond the typical max of 18 for most abilities. Half-orcs, arguably even better. They get that same point of constitution. They also get a bonus in strength, though their charisma gets hit by 2. Half-orcs for constitution also here, you'll see their max goes up to 19. So they also, if you happen to roll like a natural 18, keep in the back of your head, you're going to get a +1 adjustment for being a half-orc. That'll bump you up at creation to a 19 constitution. You cannot undersell that, or oversell, I should say. Huge bonus. So just keep that in mind with races. Halfling does get dexterity, but they lose on strength, so I'm not a fan of that. For other reasons I'm going to show you momentarily, halflings just don't make good fighters, even though it's kind of fun to think about. Elves, they lose constitution, which is one of the 2 primary for fighters, but they do get dexterity, and I love dexterity. I happen to like dexterity better than constitution even for fighters. Not, probably I would say 51% or so of fighters would not agree with me. But because dexterity affects your armor class. Constitution gives you bonuses to your HP, right? But Constitution's only going to favor you when you get hit, when you take damage, because then you have a larger hit point pool to draw that damage from. Whereas dexterity is going to come into play every attack against you, which is much more often than every hit against you. So that bonus to your armor class due to dexterity can come into play more often. And so I prefer just, you're tanking, avoid damage. And you don't have to have the greatest hit points. Just don't get it because you have great armor, a shield, high dex. You can be very difficult to hit. So elf, even though they do have a minus here to one of the 2 primaries, it's something to consider. I love elves also, just as far as roleplay value. But so let's get up to this table here, because this will kind of help weigh into this decision about should you take advantage of these racial adjustments. And what this table is for, as I've said in other videos, is how each class hits a maximum level per race. So for instance, a dwarf fighter can go no higher than level 9, whereas an elf fighter can go no higher than level 7. And I was talking about that halfling earlier, saying halfling fighters not a good idea. Not only do they lose strength to the racial adjustment down here, but they cap out at level 6. Not good. Halfling fighters also are limited even further if they have lower strength. So you'll see halfling fighters, if their strength is under 17, so like a 16 strength fighter, which is still respectable, they cap out at level 4. So halfling fighters, not the best just simply because they lose strength down here, and that's going to impact their ability to level up, which is hard capped at 6 anyway. So you'll want to take this table into consideration if you're planning on playing a fighter. Usually, well, humans always a great choice. Dwarves go up to 9, half-orcs go up to 10, even better. And you'll see both dwarf and half-orc have the great racial adjustments. And elf is limited to 7, and again, that's if he's got or she has high strength. That limit comes down to 6 and 5, I think, with lower strength scores. But you do get dexterity, so something to consider. Where I would really consider an elf fighter is if you want to play more, well, there is a ranger subclass, but the ranger type. If you want to play ranged weapons, a fighter who predominantly fights with a bow. Because not only does dexterity factor into your armor class, but it also affects your ability to hit, not damage, but to hit with ranged weapons like bows. So, cool RP value, got some significant bonuses to using bows. Elves also get +1 to hit rolls when using a longsword or the long bow. So not only will you get dexterity bonuses, hopefully, if your dexterity roll plus the adjustment is high enough, but the racial bonus, so you can be a significantly formidable bow fighter as an elf. So even though the level is limited, it is a consideration. I probably wouldn't go beyond, no lower than the elf though. Gnomes and halflings are out for me. All right, so that's our racial considerations. We're going to go on here for ability maximums and minimums. You want to just take a quick look and be familiar with this. Again, halflings, not good fighters. They max out at 17 for... So the left side here is males. On the right side here is females. You'll see the M and F up top here. So the first thing to keep in mind, female strength maximum, 17, 16, 15, they are not good. Tricky if you want to play, in my opinion, a female fighter. And yeah, AD&D got a bad rap for misogyny when it came to using his tables, but I would hope we can all agree the average male is stronger than the average female, and I think when it comes to exceptional strength, particularly today, I guess it wasn't as disparate in olden times, but the exceptional levels of strength where you get guys like Lou Ferrigno, Arnold Schwarzenegger, big, strong dudes. So the exceptionally strong males, I think, are way stronger than the exceptional females. Not that an exceptional female couldn't kick my butt, but I don't think there's a female alive who ever came anywhere close to, say, like Lou Ferrigno or Larry Wheeler or any of these guys. So in any event, that's what's reflected here in AD&D First Edition. Some DMs do not enforce the female limits. A lot do. But so you want to keep that in mind and check with your DM if they do or not if you're considering playing a female fighter. Not only do they not reach that level of 18, but there is something called exceptional strength in AD&D that only applies to the fighter class. And you have to be a fighter with a strength of 18 to then advance to that exceptional strength, which I'm going to show you now. And you'll see, other than the half-orc female, no other race can reach 18, so none of them can get exceptional strength, and exceptional strength does have exceptional consequences, impacts attributed to it. So I'm going to show you what those are now, and you'll see the importance of really considering if you want to play a female fighter. Unless you're going to be a tanky one, and that's not a bad idea. Usually when, especially new players, when they tell me they want to be a fighter, I ask them, do you want to be defensive or offensive? If you want to be defensive and tanky, you really want to go for either dexterity or constitution or both. Beef up your armor class and your hit points. And there, where strength isn't so much a factor, females make great fighters. But if you want to be an offensive damage-dealing fighter, you really kind of got to go for the males. Particularly if you hit that 18 strength. And here's why. So strength abilities at 18, right, which is what every other class can max out at for the most part. At a strength of 18, you get +1 on your to hit rolls and +2 on your damage rolls. But if you're a fighter who hits 18 naturally, then you get to roll for exceptional strength, which is what these brackets are. So you roll the percentage dice or 2 10-sided die to get your percentage roll. And if you roll on the percentage dice 78, you're going to fall in this bracket here. So you have 18.78 is how I would say it, or some DMs maybe say 18/78. But 18.78 would be your strength. You're going to get +2 instead of +1 on your 2 hit rolls. And you're going to get +4 instead of 2 on your damage. And you'll see it goes up even higher, though these are very high to hit, over 90%. So only the top 9% get this, and only 1% chance of hitting 18.00, which is not equal to 19. It's a weird math glitch, but abilities can go up to 25. You can read about that in the Deities and Demigods manual, where these tables are for values for abilities over 18. In addition to hit probability and damage, you also get greatly increased weight allowance, which is awesome for dragging out all that fat loot and carrying and using heavy gear, multiple weapons, and so forth. And opening doors and bending bars and lifting gates. You get much greater chances with exceptional strength. Only fighters, again, can go above 18 with this exceptional strength. And only, when it comes to females, only the half-orc fighter female can qualify for this, because they're the only one who can actually hit 18 as females. So that's where you got to be careful with the gender issues if your game is going to be played that way, if you want to be a fighter. I guess the only other thing I want to show you here is the elf I talked about. If you want to play an elven fighter, they are the only class that can exceed 18 naturally by racial adjustment for dexterity. So again, if you want to play a ranged fighter, if you have really high dex, say you can get your score up to an 18 dexterity, the elven adjustment of +1 gets you to 19, boom. That's huge. And again, you can read about what a 19 will offer you in Deities and Demigods. Okay, so from there, I want to go to this table here, where we talk about hit dice, hit points. Fighters and Paladins use a D10, highest in the game. So every time they get a level, they roll the D10, add that to their cumulative hit points. Rangers are a D8, but you'll see this parenthetical D8 here. And what that one is for in parentheses is that Rangers and monks, you'll see a monk has a 2. Not that a monk is a fighter, it's its own class. But Rangers and monks are the only 2 classes that at level 1, they roll their hit die twice. So even though the fighter and paladin have a higher hit die, at first level, the ranger on average is going to have better hit points than the 2 of these. They'll catch up over time, but the ranger starts out very high, or can start out very high. You're rolling the D8 twice, you're getting 2 to 16 as your starting hit points. If you're a fighter, you might have constitution bonuses. Let's say you have +2 to your hit point rolls. So you're going to get +2 on each of these D8. So actually at level 1, you're getting +4 instead of +2. So Rangers can start out level 1 very high on the hit point scale. So you want to keep that in mind when it comes to Rangers. And we'll get to Paladins as Rangers in a bit. I'm going to concentrate mostly on the fighter majors to start out. So that's their hit dice. The maximum number of hit dice, as I had said in a previous video on Clerics and Druids, this is the maximum level where they still roll hit dice. And what happens, so let's take a fighter, each level that they attain up to including 9, they roll the D10. Once they hit level 10, they no longer roll the D10, they just automatically add 3 hit points to their existing hit points. So fighter and paladin are the same there. Ranger goes up to level 10, you'll see. Where they... Well, just let me read this little asterisk here. Theirs goes up 1 die per level, guys. Okay, so yeah, pretty certain they get an extra level At level 10, they can still roll their D8 with a paladin or fighter maxed out at 9. I'll double check that momentarily when they get to their charts, their XP charts, but I'm pretty sure that's how that works. Down here we have weapons and armor, and you'll see fighter and the subclasses can use any types of weapons and armor. They can use oil, meaning you chuck a flask of oil, lay it on fire. No problem with that. Poison they can potentially use. Never for the paladin. Paladins must be lawful good. Everything they do must be aligned with that. So there's no excuse for them ever using poison. And I'll talk about paladins more when we get there. But huge bonus. Definitely want to keep that in mind. The only class that can use every weapon, every shield, every armor. That's their bread and butter. One thing to consider is if you're going to play a fighter of a race that's on the shorter, smaller size, there are a couple of limitations. So, for instance, the dwarf, right? I think they average about 4.5 feet. Half-orcs are 5.5, so they exceed this, but dwarves are a consideration. Elves you should be in the clear too, but again, dwarves are going to be under 5 feet generally. They cannot use the longbow. They also cannot use any weapon over 12 foot in length, which is pretty much going to be your pole arms, and weight also can limit what they can use. They can't use super heavy stuff like two-handed swords and super heavy pole arms. But just something to keep in mind if you're going to play a dwarf. You can use a short bow. You can, that's open to you, but you cannot use the longbow. Just too long a weapon for them to handle at such a short height. So I think that's the only limitation on fighters when it comes to weapons. Check here. Yeah, nothing else I want to show you there. All right, so we're going to get down to the narrative part here now on fighters. Most classes get a 10% bonus to their experience if their primary abilities are high enough. For the fighter, that's only strength. They need 15 or above to get 10% of their XP. Shows you again D10 for their hit points. They can be of any alignment they wish. They do not use any spells, but they do have a large number of magic items they can use, which is great. Particularly weapons and armor really come in handy for fighters. When a fighter attains 9th level, they can establish a freehold, clearing out the land and building a stronghold. And they'll automatically attract men-at-arms and collect tax revenue. It's a fun end game for them. They can build, keep or castles eventually, and attract and hire all kinds of followers and men-at-arms and henchmen and so forth. End game like that is not as well developed in AD&D. I don't know that it is in most versions of Dungeons and Dragons. There was a companion set that came out as part of BECMI with basic and expert and advances to companion, which is a rule set that talks about those higher levels and tries to build some mechanics around it. If you want to take a look at that, but it's good to just be aware of this information and talk to your DM if you're doing a longer campaign, if they do intend on playing out that end game. It is kind of a bonus that the fighters can build these strongholds and get the followers and so forth. Right, the table here, you'll see, as I was talking about earlier, up to 9th level, they roll their hit dice, and then once they hit 10, they just start adding 3 hit points on every level. This is the XP they need to advance in levels, and I believe it's moderate for fighters, I believe. So the thieves are the best, and then assassins, though I never really play assassins, they're just difficult, particularly with alignment issues and assassinations and whatnot. It's hard to have. They could make a great solo character, but hard to work into a party, I find. So I never really played with them. But in any event, thieves' best advancement, I think at 1250, they hit level 2, 1251. Where fighters who were still pretty good got to go to 2001. Assassins are slightly higher than thieves. Then I think clerics would be next. I think like at 1501, 1501, they're going to hit level 2. And then druids. And then fighters, I believe, come after that. So they're kind of middle of the pack fighters. Pretty good on XP advancement. And you do, not only do you want to check, level 2, but you do need to look into the deeper levels here when you're comparing classes, because some of them advance sooner, some later, meaning like, fighter might advance pretty quickly compared to another class at early levels, but at higher levels they slow down. You want to just check that out. So I usually like to look like at level 2 and then level 6 and then maybe level 10. Just do a comparison if I'm comparing to another class. All right, so at this point, I think that pretty well. No, actually, there's a couple of things I want to show you before I get into the Paladins and Rangers. I'm going to move over to... where do I have... I guess we'll just stick here. I want to get to some attack tables so I can show you for fighters where they excel in another place. Okay, so these are, you've heard of FACO probably, which is usually associated with 2nd edition, but it really kind of did originate in 1st edition. I talked about that in the Cleric Druid video to an extent, so I'm not going to here. But these tables here, these are the attack matrices, and they are based off of the FACO concept. And how it works is you roll a 20-sided die to see if you hit. This would be your opponent's armor class. This is the level of the character, and there's 4 tables here, because this is for cleric, druids, and monks. This one's for magic user and illusionist. Here's our fighter table. So this is the one we're going to want to be looking at. This is your thieves and assassins on the lower right here. But fighters have the best attack tables. For one thing, you'll see they advance every 2 levels, so they quickly advance through the attack tables, where something like a magic user goes up every 5 levels very slowly. So very quickly, the fighter pulls away from everyone. So you'll see here for, let's say we have an armor class 0 opponent, FACO, right, to hit armor class 0. A level 1 fighter needs a 20, like pretty much I think everyone else. Yeah, they all need 20s to hit armor class 0. Then when a fighter wants to, let's see, I guess if we get to level 3 here, this same fighter only needs an 18 to hit armor class 0. Where the thief at level 3 still needs a 20, mage at level 3 still needs a 20, cleric at 3 still needs a 20. So you'll see how they start pulling away already at lower levels. And it only gets better from there. So fighters do have the best attack tables of all the classes, and that applies to the subclasses too of Paladin and Ranger. You'll see bards included here. I'm not going to get into bards. They are kind of like an optional class in 1st edition. Probably the worst developed version of the bard. It does improve in 2e, but that's neither here nor there for this video. Alright, so best attack tables. Saving throws are pretty good. I guess you would say moderate for a fighter. Let's get to our fighter saving throw. Here's our saving throw table. You can just compare these. I definitely would when picking a class, just to look them through. And again, how this works is there's 5 types of saving throws. If you're saving against paralyzation, poison, or death magic, petrifying or polymorph, a rod, staff, or wand, breath weapon like a dragon fire, or spells, an enemy magic user. So if you're saving against any of these types of attacks, you look for your class. So all of the fighters, Rangers and Paladins, fall in this grouping here, and this would be their level. And so you can compare the numbers. And you'll see that, for instance, like fighters, I think, are particularly bad saving against breath weapon and spells, even as they advance in levels compared to a lot of the other classes. Or like a mage does very well against spells because that's their bread and butter. But in some other types of attacks, fighters can get some pretty good saving throws. So for instance, like against poison and paralyzation, at level 10, a fighter's going to have an 8 or better to save, where a level 10 magic user, who you would think should be pretty good, right? Magic is their thing. They need a 13. Their spell resistance or spell saving throws are good, but fighters beat them out when it comes to paralyzation or poison. So do your comparison, see what you think about the fighter saving throws. I want you to see where it is, page 79 in the Dungeon Master's Guide for 1st edition. And I guess that's pretty much it that I'm going to show you for the standard fighter. We'll move on to the Paladin now. So Paladins and Rangers are more difficult to qualify for. So to be a fighter, it's pretty easy to do. As far as rolling abilities. You can be any alignment, so it's not very restricted. No matter what you roll, you're probably going to be able to qualify to be a fighter. And that's the way it should be, right? Because that should be the meat of any adventuring party. You need to have some good fighters in there. I wouldn't be surprised if some parties are almost all fighters. They're the typical adventurer. But Paladins and Rangers have a lot of restrictions. They have a lot more abilities than the standard fighter, but they do have those restrictions to balance them. So we're going to go through that now. Paladin character. As a subclass of fighter, they need these minimum in their ability scores in order to qualify to be a Paladin. And they're not so bad. The big sticking point is the 17 here on charisma. But to go through them quickly, they must have a minimum strength of 12. 12 or better in strength. They need to have 9 or higher intelligence, 13 or higher wisdom, and that's because they are kind of aligned with the cleric, so they do need a significant amount of wisdom. Constitution of 9, not so hard to do, and that charisma score 17, very hard to get, depending on the rolling protocol. For instance, I don't know any DMs that do this, but if you did a straight 3d6 down the line, near impossible to get that. But still, this could be a killer, because particularly you're a fighter class. You need strength and constitution, right, as a fighter class. Tertiary, you probably really want dexterity, too. So your 4th level, your 4th level ability here has got to be a 17. That's tough to swallow, even if you do technically qualify with the rolls. But Paladins are natural-born leaders. They're very charismatic. Doesn't just mean good-looking. It means they're influential, too. People look up to them. They can, get their way with people when negotiating, and they inspire people and so forth. So they need very, very high charisma. Not just ability requirements. They also, as you can see here, are restricted to lawful good alignment. That means they are always the perfect Boy Scout in their behavior. If they are not, the DM needs to adjudicate that swiftly. I believe it'll even say if they do any single evil act, they will automatically and immediately be stripped of their Paladin powers forever. And if they act chaotically, they need to atone with a high-level cleric or something. Might even say here, yeah, okay. So long good deeds are the meat and drink of Paladins. If they ever knowingly perform an act which is chaotic, again, knowingly being the key there, they must seek out a 7th or higher level cleric of lawful good alignment, confess their sins, and do penance as prescribed by the cleric, which might be a quest or something that the cleric lays out for them to atone for that chaotic act. Evil is just off the table, though. Ever knowingly commit an evil act, he or she loses status of paladinhood immediately and irrevocably. Gone forever. So you do not want to commit evil acts. And it is discussed in the Dungeon Master's Guide. You can't play dumb as a paladin either. Not only can they not commit evil acts, they can't condone them. They can't even group up with a party of characters that are not all good alignment. Other than they can go, I think it says they can tolerate somebody of neutral alignment on a single adventure, but like a campaign, they cannot regularly adventure with neutral characters. So, got a druid around? Sorry, can't play with the paladin. Druids have to be neutral. And God forbid evil. They can never associate with evil people. So not only can they not even party up with non-good characters, but they cannot commit non-good acts. And if they do, they lose everything. And as I was starting to say earlier, they can't even look the other way. So let's just say they're out on an adventure with a neutrally aligned, like maybe a chaotic neutral character, just for a quick quest or an adventure. And if this chaotic neutral character decides to do something shady, the other characters in the party can't say, hey, Paladin, look over here while our chaotic neutral thief steals something from a family who needs it. Or, Paladin, why don't you go head down to the church and start mass? We'll be there shortly. The party can't collude to get the Paladin out of the way so that they can do something less than lawful good. Not that simple. Can't do that kind of stuff. So if you're going to have a paladin, you want to make sure, I like to suggest that the other players make sure. So if a particular player wants to be a paladin, I like to make sure that the other party members are consulted and they're okay with it, because again, there's alignment issues there that they've got to fall in line for the sake of the paladin. And you want to make sure everybody's okay with that. For the 10% bonus, they need strength and wisdom in excess of 15, not just strength like a fighter. And then there are benefits and some limitations. So I was talking about limitations here and alignment and abilities. Let's finish up with the limitations before I get into the bonuses. Oh, I missed one. Okay, so paladins can never retain more than 10 magic items, and this is how they list them. No more than 1 magical suit, 1 magical shield, 4 weapons, and 4 of any other magic items. Alright, so that's the max they can ever hold on to. They can never retain wealth, and this is a big one. They can only keep enough sufficient treasure to support themselves in a modest manner. They can pay henchmen and men-at-arms and things like that. They can even someday construct a small castle. So I'm pretty certain this isn't expressly written anywhere, but most DMs I know go by the following. Will allow a paladin to keep a savings, like a small hoard of their treasure somewhere, but they kind of got to keep 2 separate accounts. Think of it like modern day bank accounts. They can have this checking account, which would be the account for maintaining themselves in a modest manner. They can pay henchmen out of that. They can pay their room and board and fix their weapons and buy weapons and armor and stuff like that out of that checking account. And then they have like a trust. And in that trust, they can deposit all of their other wealth. That trust may only be withdrawn from to build a small castle eventually. That's how I like to play as far as wealth. Alright, so they can technically hold on to a large amount of it, but only to construct a castle and then maintain said castle once it's built. So paying taxes on it, maintenance, and so forth. Any loot that a paladin comes across, immediately, top 10% off the top, has to be paid to the local lawful good alignment institution, a church or something like that. So that's immediate before they do anything else with savings accounts and that trust I was talking about earlier or whatever else. Paladins will have henchmen. They have to be lawful good alignment. And if possible, paladins will take service or form an alliance with other lawful good characters. So good to keep in mind, they do not attract the body of men-at-arms as normal fighters do. So let's get back to this page, and we're going to go through some of the bonuses here for the Paladin, because they are significant. So this is where it makes it worthwhile playing a Paladin. So not only are they great fighters, and I think in every way they perform like a fighter. Hit points, attacks per round. Oh, I did not get into that when we were talking about the fighter. Oh, just caught my first flub. So we're going to do that momentarily. Actually, might as well just do it now, I guess. So attacks per round. Fighters and fighter subclasses are the only classes that can get multiple attacks per round. And here's the table. And sorry I missed this when talking about standard fighters. So, like every other class, up to level 6 for fighters and paladins and up to level 7 for a ranger, they attack 1 attack per round. And this only pertains to melee attacks, not ranged weapons like bows and so forth. Once a fighter or paladin hits level 7 or a ranger hits level 8, they get 3 attacks every 2 rounds. So in one attack, they swing once, next round they attack twice, next round they attack once, next round they attack twice, and so forth. And then once they hit 13 or 15 for the ranger, they can attack twice every round. This is huge, particularly if you're an offensive fighter who's got strength, maybe exceptional strength, using a big weapon, particularly if you use like a heavy two-handed weapon and not a shield, like a two-handed sword or something, or a nice halberd, you can rack up major damage with your damage bonuses, multiple attacks. This is where fighters can really shine. And what made me think of this is I was trying to point out that paladins go neck and neck with fighters, I think, on everything. On, as you can see, multiple attacks per round, on their hit points, on the attack tables. So paladins basically are fighters, but better. We talked about the downsides to them, right? It's hard to qualify, and if you do, you got some loot considerations. You can't hold on to everything, and you got to pay a tithe. But that's really not a big deal in light of the bonuses they get. So typically, if a fighter can qualify for a paladin and they're okay living with that lawful good alignment stuff, you want to be a paladin, if the choice is between the two. So, first benefit, they can detect evil up to a 60-foot distance. They can do that as many times as they want during the day. They just need to announce it to the DM that they're concentrating on doing so, and it's directional. So they got to look in front of them, or they want to detect evil to their right or so forth, up to a certain distance. So if they want to know if some stranger they just met, a humanoid, is evil or not, do that little Jedi detect evil skill that they got here, and you can figure out if they're evil or not. It's not ESP, you can't read their minds, but you can just detect evilness about them. So if you got a lawful evil, highly intelligent humanoid who's trying to play it off like they're a good person, Paladin's going to see right through that. Great skill to have. Saving throws, another huge one. All saving throws, Paladins get +2 bonus on the dice. Huge. As we talked about, fighters already have pretty decent saving throws. Paladins add a +2. That's 10% bonus on all saving throws when you're rolling the d20. Huge. Immunity to all forms of disease. You don't even need saving throws against diseases. They're just automatically immune. They're so holy. Diseases and rot just don't affect them. Fantastic stuff. They have the ability to lay hands on themselves or others. It's once a day you can do this. It's a form of healing. They can heal 2 hit points of damage per level of experience that the paladin has. So a first level paladin can lay on hands once a day for 2 hit points to themselves or somebody else. A 5th level paladin can lay on hands for 10 hit points of healing to themselves or others once per day. Great skill to have in a pinch. I've never seen anything that talks about how many segments, casting time, or anything like that. I assume it's instant. That's how I play it as a DM. Your DM might do it differently. You might want to check that out, but that's how I do it. They also have the ability to cure a disease of any sort. They can do this only once per week per 5 levels of experience. So a 5th level paladin, up to 5th level, they can do it once per week. 6 through 10, they can do it twice a week. Being able to cure a disease of any sort, that's pretty damn big. Clerics don't even get to do that until higher levels, I think. Oh, I'm really going to probably look silly here. I think Cure Disease is a 3rd level spell, so a cleric maybe can't do that till 5th level. I don't know that that's exactly right. Look it up in the PHB yourself. Don't take my word on it, but it's definitely not a 1st level spell. So yeah, clerics can't even do that right away. And paladins can do it only once per week or two, once per week or twice per week or so. But they can do it in a pinch, and they can do it at level 1, and they do not fail at it, so great ability to have. Continuing emanation of a protection from evil spell in a 10-foot radius, meaning nearby party members also get this bonus. Really big. So you'll want to read about this in the character spells further down the PHB here, but essentially anybody within that 10, well, I said 10 foot, I think. It's 1 inch, which equates to 10 yards outdoors, 10 feet indoors. Any friendly within that range gets this protection from evil, which equates to +2 for enemy to hits. So +2 like to the armor class of the character who's within that range. And +2 on saving throws. This is continual, permanent, full-time, 24/7, does not stop. Fantastic. Only applies to evil. So if you're fighting some grizzly bears, they're not evil, they're just aggressive. So it wouldn't apply there, but anything evil, it's got you covered. I believe also protection of evil prevents certain evil types like of demons and undead from making any physical contact with somebody within that range. So it's quite powerful. And as you'll see, these are numbered. We're only halfway through. We got a few more, kids. 3rd level, Paladin gains the ability, another huge one here, to turn undead. Very, very big. If you watched my cleric video, turning undead is huge. I feel like Donald Trump now, huge. But let's see if I can get to cleric paladin turning table. Yeah, here we are. This is the turning table. So paladins can start doing turn, which is kind of like exorcism, I guess you would say. They can start it at level 3, where a cleric can start it at level 1. And a paladin will always perform at 2 levels below a cleric. So this is the level here of a cleric. You got to go 2 below for the paladin. So for instance, if a paladin is level 3, you're going to look at the level 1 column. Paladin is level 5, you're going to go to the level 3 column for a paladin, where the cleric would be at level 5 here. And then how you read this is, let's say that level 5 paladin, they're going to operate as level 3 cleric equivalent on the turning chart. So you look at the type of undead they're trying to turn, let's say a skeleton, they would roll the d20, and a level 3 paladin needs a 4 or higher, easy to do, to turn a skeleton. Something more difficult, like a ghoul, they need a 10 or higher on the d20 to turn them, and so forth. T stands for turning immediately, no roll required, they just automatically do it. D stands for destroy or death, I'm not sure, I think it's destroy. But in any event, you destroy that undead creature. You not only turn them, but you destroy them. Turning means they would just try to run away from the cleric or paladin that turned them as quickly and strongly as they can. They're like deathly afraid, want to get away from that cleric or paladin. Where destroying means they just destroy them on the spot. D star is the last symbol on here. And for every other turning episode, clerics and paladins can turn or destroy from 2 to 12 opponents. So 2d6. If there's a star, an asterisk here, instead of 2 to 12, it's 7 to 12 opponents can be turned. So you're rolling the d6 and adding 6. Still hit that maximum, that ceiling of 12, but the minimum now is 7 instead of 2. And you'll see these D stars are just at the very higher levels and are only on lower level undead creatures. So that's turning for a paladin, just like a cleric, except performing 2 levels lower. Huge skill to have. And you'll get an idea here, if you haven't already. There's a theme, right? Disease is an undead. Evil, that's the paladins. That's their thing. That's their motif. So they got a lot of powers and abilities in combating that kind of stuff. At level 4, this is a very cool one. Level 4, a paladin can attract or call for his warhorse. There are, a warhorse is a type of a heavy horse, a heavy warhorse, which you can find in the monster manual, which I'm going to show you momentarily. But the Paladin's warhorse is a jacked up on steroids heavy warhorse. So let me just show you the warhorse first. So here's my monster manual I had ready for us. And here is the heavy warhorse in this column. And you'll see they have an armor class 7. They have a movement rate of 15 inches. Slower than most other horses. But still, it's a horse, so pretty quick. Faster than a human. Hit dice 3 plus 3. Number of attacks 3, and they do significant damage. 1 to 8 from the front hoofs, 1 to 3 with a bite. 3 attacks. That's pretty damn good. 2 to 16 on the hooves, plus the extra 1 to 3. So they are significant. They're considered large creatures. They're strong. They got some health. They're fairly fast. It's a good creature to be on top of, right? A heavy warhorse there. Well, the Paladin gets one of those, but instead of 3 plus 3 on the hit dice, they are 5 plus 5. Much more health, almost double. They also move at 18 inches, the equivalent of a medium warhorse, as opposed to the 15 inches of a typical heavy warhorse. And instead of a typical armor class 7, they're armor class 5. Like I said, jacked up heavy warhorse on steroids. They're pretty dope. They're awesome. They're more intelligent. And also, I'm going to show you, there's a couple of other things to keep in mind about the warhorse I'm going to show you in a moment in the Dungeon Master's Guide. One other thing I want to show you here is, if a paladin loses their warhorse, they must wait until the end of the 10-year period for another. So as outlined in the DMG, warhorses, I think I got to go to like page 18-ish or so. Let's see, assassination, yeah, it's right around here. Here we go, the Paladin's warhorse. So when a paladin attracts a warhorse, that warhorse will serve up to 10 years, after which point they're too old to be of service anymore, and a paladin needs to get a new one. And this section in the DMG talks about that process of attracting one. And they'll basically say at 4th level, when the paladin is high enough to call a warhorse, they'll quote-unquote see its location. So they'll just know inherently, automatically, where this horse is in the world to be located. And to give you some guidance, the authors say here, within a week's travel is where you should place this warhorse for the paladin to get to. So it should be a bit of a journey. It doesn't have to be a 7-day ride, but within a week or so. You know, I guess it's not a hard rule. You can go a little beyond it if you wish for whatever reason. And there should be some kind of quest they need to complete to do it. Defeat an evil owner who's got the horse caged, or something for the church, you know, just some kind of minor quest. They need to earn this warhorse, but not something completely deadly and out of the realm of possibility. You don't want to get crazy about it. But once they see the warhorse, they got to go do their little quest and attain it. And they'll show you here quantitatively the Paladin's warhorse has 5 to 7 points of intelligence, so more intelligent than the normal horse, you know, more than just typical animal intelligence. By the way, intelligence ratings are listed here in the beginning of the monster manual somewhere, one of the early pages. Where are you? Here we go, page 6. Starting at non-intelligent, up to animal intelligence is only 1. And so you'll see warhorse, the Paladin's warhorse, 2 brackets above. They're considered low intelligence, where 8 to 10, the next bracket up, average human. So the Paladin's warhorse is as smart as a dumber, say, human being. So a little tidbit of trivia there. But more importantly, what I wanted to show you here is the Paladin's warhorse, although they're 5+5 on their hit dice, their hit points will never be lower than half of the Paladin's level. So for instance, a hit die is the 8-sided die, and the warhorse is going to roll 5 of them. So on that 8-sided hit die, they can never roll lower than 2 if the Paladin who owns them is 4th level, because half of 4 is 2. So if the Paladin's rolling for the hit points of their warhorse and they roll a 1, it becomes a 2. If the Paladin is 16, they show you, half of that is 8. So on each of the 5 hit dice, the Paladin can only roll an 8 for the hit points of their warhorse. So it's automatically the 8, the highest value. 8 times 5 is 40, and you get the +5 at the end, 45. So every Paladin of 16th level or higher, their warhorse is automatically going to have 45 hit points. So I just wanted to keep that there for everybody. You'll see here if the Paladin loses Paladinhood, they automatically lose, like I said, all their abilities, and they're going to lose their mount as well. Alright, so back to the Paladin's abilities. There is something else similar to the horse, another piece of equipment they get, a holy sword. This one is huge though. Holy swords, very rare, very powerful. You're going to find them in the Dungeon Master's Guide. And let's see, the holy sword is going to be later in the DMG. Magic swords. Here we are. I was going to say almost there. So it's called Sword +5 Holy Avenger, and this is the description. Oh, it actually even says here in italics, or, like e.g. the Holy Sword. So yeah, Holy Sword is +5. Now, important to note, a Holy Sword is only going to be a +2 sword in the hands of anything other than a Paladin. So lots of value to a Paladin. Really, I mean, to anybody, a +2 sword's great. But in the hands of a Paladin, it becomes a +5. That means +5 onto hit rolls, +5 on damage rolls. Great sword to have. Awesome sword to have. In addition to that +5, it creates a magical resistance aura within 5-foot radius. Also within that 5-foot radius, dispels magic. So, Paladins hold, and this is only when the Holy Avenger is equipped, meaning it's in the hands of the Paladin. But when it is, within a 5-foot radius around that Paladin, it's dispelling all kinds of magic, and even spells cast at them, 50% resistance, even before you roll saving throws. Okay, kind of like the racial resistance for elves and half-elves of 90 and 30% respectively. You roll that resistance roll before the saving throw, and if you succeed on the magic resistance, you don't even need a saving throw. You just completely resist the magic, has no effect on you. Thing here. Oh. +10 hit points of bonus damage to chaotic evil opponents. So the polar alignment of the lawful good of the Paladin. If they come across anything chaotic evil, forget the +5. They get +10 when it comes to damage against those type of characters. Really, really good sword. Just out of curiosity, I don't want to ruin the magic for you, but there's tables in here that talk about value of all the magical items within the DMG, and suffice it to say, Holy Avenger, very powerful, very profitable sword to come across, very valuable, particularly for paladins. You definitely want to get your hands on that if you can. As a DM, I wouldn't be throwing those around too often either. 9th level, paladins gain the ability to employ cleric spells. And you're going to see that chart here. So at 9th level, a paladin can cast one first level cleric spell. At level 12, they can cast 2 level 1 spells and 2 level 2 spells. Like a cleric, they got to pray for them daily. They don't get these spells until 9th level, so they're going to be pretty high up there. But if your paladin makes it up into the higher levels, double digits, you can start getting some cleric spells going, and that can be useful. Not nearly as many, and they can't go beyond, not nearly as many as a cleric, and they can't go beyond 4th level, but still significant. Actually, that was it, I guess, on the bonuses for the Paladin. We talked about already the restrictions on them, so the only other thing I think I want to get into here would be the XP for them. Like the fighter, they cap out at level 9 for rolling hit dice, and from there forward they only get +3. They only get +3 per level on their hit points. Their XP advancement, pretty darn slow. I think they might be the worst in the game at 2750 just to get to level 1. So they advance slowly. Something to keep in mind if you're thinking you want to play a paladin. And I think even at higher levels, like level 10, they need 700,000. That too might be the worst in the game. I think they are. Pretty bad. Alright, that brings us to the Rangers. Ranger, I would say equally difficult to qualify for as far as ability rolls, might be even harder than the Paladin. Rangers have 4 abilities, so strength they need 13, intelligence 13, wisdom and constitution they need 14. So the Paladin had 5, I think, abilities they need, but there's a few of them that are 9s and 12s, not quite yet. 2 9s, a 12, a 13, not as hard as the Ranger. The big sticking point is really that 17 in charisma. So I don't know statistically. I mean, of course, you can calculate that out, but I'm guessing the Ranger might be even harder to do as far as abilities. They need 10% in, where is it here? Ranger has 15 strength and all 3, intelligence and wisdom. That's how they get their 10%. So hard to qualify for that 10% for a Ranger. 3 15s, not easy to do. Again, dependent upon the rolling protocol of your DM. Rangers, like the Paladin, they're awesome fighters. And they get a bunch of bonuses, couple of restrictions. The restrictions are not as bad as the Paladin, I don't think. They're not as limiting. And the bonuses they get, they're pretty darn good in their own right. So we're going to go through that now. But they do not quite keep up with standard fighters in other areas. For instance, again, their HD rolls are going to be D8 as opposed to the DN of Fighter and Paladin, though at level 1, if you remember, they double up on that D8. Multiple attacks per round. They advance slightly slower, slightly later than the Fighters and Paladins. Otherwise, I guess they're equivalent in every other way to Fighters and Paladins. Minus, or aside from these abilities and penalties we're going to discuss now. So when fighting, this is a huge one. Fighting humanoid type creatures of the giant class. Rangers add 1 hit point of damage for each level of experience they have. So, giant class is a little counterintuitive because creatures like kobolds that are only like 3 feet tall are considered the giant class. I don't know the explanation behind that, the rationalization for it. So just learn the list here. Or if you use my AD&D toolkit, I'm going to argue, let's see, where's my ranger? I'm going to argue one of the many, many, many benefits that toolkit gives you. All kinds of class and racial bonuses, ability bonuses, and penalties. They're all listed here on bullet lists for you to keep things easy, to remind you, and so forth. And so here's that giant class humanoid bonus that rangers get. And if you hover over the tooltip here, it actually shows you what those giant class humanoids are. It enumerates them for you. Bugbears, Ettins, giants, gnolls, goblins, hobgoblins, kobolds, only 3 feet tall, they still qualify, ogres, ogre magi, orcs, and trolls. You'd be surprised how often, especially at lower levels, you're going to come across those creatures. And when you do, the ranger gets +1 to damage per level of the ranger. So, a 5th level ranger is going to get +5 damage every time he hits one of those creatures. It is crazy. Especially, like I said, at lower levels. Ranger's going to be using pretty good weapons. They often have pretty good strength if they've, God forbid, got magical bonuses. So, like, let's say a ranger's running around with a longsword, comes across a group of orcs. He's going to roll, or she, that d8 for the longsword. Let's say they got a +1 or 2 strength adjustment. So 1 to 8 plus 2. 5th level, they're going to get another 5 added on to that. So at a minimum, they're doing 6, 7, 8 damage against an orc. Even if they roll a 1 on their damage roll, they're still doing 8 damage against an orc or any other, giant class humanoid. It's crazy the amount of damage they can do. So big skill there. Don't look past that. It's a big deal. And like I said, all the other bonuses apply on top of that giant class humanoid bonus. So magic weapon bonus, strength bonus, plus this humanoid giant class bonus. So it all adds up. It stacks very, very well. Rangers can surprise opponents 50% of the time, which is a roll of 1 to 3 on a d6. And they themselves are only surprised on a 1 on a d6. Typically 1 or 2 indicates surprise. Not always, but typically. So you'll see instead of 1 or 2, they're only surprised on a 1, and they surprise others 1 to 3 instead of 1 to 2. Now the surprising others is only when they're running solo or with other rangers. Because if a ranger's in a party, the ranger can sneak up on somebody else, but the other characters necessarily won't. So if they're with other characters that can be sneaky at the same efficacy that a ranger can, they'll keep that bonus, or if the ranger's alone. But bear in mind, if they're with a half-orc fighter, not going to happen, because the other characters cannot be as sneaky and stealthy. But it's a great skill to have. And unlike the ability to surprise others, this bonus of being surprised does apply to the party. So a typical party will be surprised in a roll of 1 to 2 on the d6, but if they have a ranger with them who's conscious and active, that entire party can only be surprised in a roll of 1, because the ranger will pick up on telltale signs indicating there's an enemy nearby and communicate that to the party. So parties love having rangers, if for nothing else, just that surprise bonus. That is huge. Can't tell you how important surprise is in first edition, more than any other edition actually. Because not only does the surprised party not get to act, but in first edition, it can be more than one segment. So there can be multiple segments that the surprising party gets to act before the other one does, which means you can effectually end a battle before it even starts if you get a significant amount of surprise. So, great skill to have. Tracking, possible outdoors and indoors. And you can just read through this and get the percentages on efficacy on this. Outdoors is a base chance. So if a ranger says they are trying to follow a creature, just give them the base chance of 90% success. They're going to be able to do it with these adjustments. So for every day that's passed, minus 10%. Every hour of rain or snow, minus out 25%. Otherwise, on a clear day, if it's within 24 hours, they're going to have a really good chance of tracking down anything or any creature they want to. Anything or anyone. 8th level, rangers start getting druid spells. And I think at 9th level, yeah, they start getting magic user spells. So how the paladin gets cleric spells, rangers get druid and magic user spells. Very cool, right? So here's their spell table. Level 8, they get 1 druid spell. Level 9, they have that 1 druid and 1 magic user, and you'll see how it advances there. Again, not too many of them. Only starts at higher levels, and they can't go beyond level 3 in druid spells and not beyond level 2 in magic user spells, but still, I'd love to have that in my back pocket and still have heavy armor and a shield and a big-ass weapon. So rangers are pretty awesome. Nice to have that magic. 10th level, rangers are able to employ all non-written magic items that pertain to clairaudience, clairvoyance, ESP, and telepathy. So no scrolls, but otherwise they get to use those items. Also 10th level, rangers attract a group of followers. The restrictions, not as bad, like I said, as the paladin, but you'll see. They have to be of good alignment, so they can be neutral good, chaotic good, or lawful good, but they gotta be good. And if they lose that non-good alignment, they immediately are stripped of all of their ranger benefits and become a fighter. Even though they're a fighter, they're still stuck with those 8-sided hit dice from this point forward, even though they lost their ranger status. Rangers cannot hire men-at-arms, servants, and so forth, or henchmen. That's a problem. Until they get to 8th level. Everybody else can at lower levels. So if they're in a party, you got to hope you'll rely on your other party members to hire the henchmen, because you as a ranger cannot. No more than 3 rangers can ever operate within the same party at one time. Not really anything you got to worry about much, I would think. It's going to be, I guess, tricky to get 3 people in one party who want to play a ranger, and even if you do, they got to qualify for it. So it's not easy to do, not really going to be much of a problem, but you do need to know that rule. And rangers, here's the big limiter for rangers. They can only carry as much loot or treasure. They can only possess as much loot or treasure as they can carry. That includes a mount. So a ranger with a horse, whatever loot they can carry on themselves and that horse, that's all they can carry. So first thing should pop into your mind, rangers want to convert to platinum pieces as often as possible, right? Because they can only keep what they can carry on them or their mount. Everything that's in excess of that must be donated to a worthy communal or institutional cause, like a church or an orphanage, things of that nature. Experience. In between the paladin and the fighter, not much above the fighter at lower levels. I think even at mid and higher levels, so 325 at level 10. Let's see what a fighter is. I think they're like 250. Right, I can't be reading this right. Level 10 fighter at 500,000? Oh, are they better than the fighter? Level 10, 325. They are. Okay, so this, I had talked, I think, earlier in this video, how as you rise through the levels, who's better than the other can change. So fighter gets to level 2, say, quicker than a ranger does, but a ranger gets to level 10 quicker than a fighter does. So they do change as they advance. I didn't realize that. So yeah, rangers level up faster eventually. Good to know. Here's their spell chart. And then, as we talked about earlier, this is the multiple attacks per round. And as I said, Rangers advance a little more slowly than fighters and paladins on this table. But that's, well, I guess the only other thing I should show you this footnote. So this is talking about creatures that are below level 1, so kobolds, human, like your typical like townspeople who are level 0, right? Um, in those cases, for creatures or humanoids that are lower than level 1, you don't use this chart here for fighters, paladins, and rangers. They just simply get 1 attack per level. So a 5th level fighter is going to get 5 attacks if they're fighting your typical level 0 townsfolk. Or a paladin fighting kobolds is going to get 1 attack per level. All right, so that's something to keep in mind. And as you can imagine, when you're fighting those level 0 creatures and humanoids, fighter types are getting lots of attacks off. So another huge bonus to keep in mind if you're going to be of the fighter class or subclass. But that being said, for the Rangers, I think that's pretty much it. So that'll do it for our assessment of the Ranger, Paladin, and Fighter classes here. I hope this was helpful. I hope it was enjoyable. And I hope that we'll see you at the next video. Take care.